Once upon a time, BlackBerry was the absolute nuts. It offered something all its competitors couldn't touch, like access to emails on the go. Even if you didn't own a BlackBerry yourself, you can bet your bottom dollar that you knew someone who did, or that you would at least see one in the hands of someone else on a regular basis. That physical QWERTY keyboard with its tap, tap, tapping could be heard in every train carriage and on every plane. It wasn't just about emailing on the go though. You also had BBM, BlackBerry's instant messenger service. It might be all about WhatsApp now, but BBM had read receipts down donkeys years ago. It was yet another unique reason to buy a BlackBerry, appealing to a huge range of people, not just those in suits. Sadly, those days are gone, and while BlackBerry may still have users, it's lost its mojo. In 2016, BlackBerry announced that it would no longer be making devices of its own, with TCL picking up the license. Now, in 2020, TCL has reported that it no longer has the license and will not sell any more BlackBerry devices after the 31st of August 2020. Much has been written over the years about what happened to BlackBerry. The company, once briefly the most valuable company in Canada, has effectively been struggling for a long time, with its stock hovering flat around the $10 mark, effectively a zombie stock. The Q2 2019 earnings release has done little to help. The company missed estimates, sparking a new sell-off and another wave of articles. Is the picture painted by the stock a fair one, particularly for a company whose revenues are up 20%? It belies all the changes that have taken place in the company in the last 10 years, including hiring a new CEO, its pivot towards reinventing itself as a software company, and its efforts to become the world's largest and most trusted AI cybersecurity company, and acquiring Cylance, an innovative and successful company in the booming cybersecurity space. So what happened to BlackBerry? A lot has been written about why BlackBerry lost out to Apple and Samsung for dominance of the smartphone market, so it does not really bear to be repeated in great detail. Fundamentally, the mistakes were linked to an excessive focus on enterprise over consumer tastes and preferences, an OS that nobody was building apps for, and phones that looked clunky and did not have desired functionality. The physical keyboard did not make up for the lack of smart screen, or the size of it. Ultimately, the story of BlackBerry is one of failing to keep up with how people interact with a new and rapidly changing technology. It bears many parallels to the decline of email usage. Email, once revolutionary and ubiquitous, was considered to be on a rapid decline. Sleeker, faster ways of communicating, many of them mobile native, were taking over, for example, Slack and WhatsApp. A lot of communication also became image-based rather than text-based, and email did not lend itself well to that. It had gotten to the point that some were, and still are, predicting the death of the medium in the near future. The tone of reporting, however, has recently become significantly less catastrophic. Email is apparently seeing a resurgence, but used in a different way. It has now become less of a personal or corporate communication tool, and more of a marketing instrument. The wilderness years. How did BlackBerry survive? BlackBerry survived the darkest years in its history, 2011 to 2016, because of geographic and technology peculiarity. Its devices were extremely popular in the developing world. While the market share declined significantly in the Western world, demand for BlackBerry phones remained strong in developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and Indonesia. As recently as 2014, Africa and the Middle East accounted for 40% of BlackBerry's total revenue. The phone maker owned 48% of the mobile market in South Africa and 70% of the smartphone market. 3% of BlackBerry users worldwide are Nigerian. This was because of technology and excess price. BlackBerry's low data usage made it more accessible, while 3 and 4G technologies had not penetrated developing countries yet at the time. This sustained the company while it tried to retool its strategy and return to viability. According to research by Vodacom, BlackBerry had more customers in Africa than Android and iOS combined. In fact, BlackBerry said at the time that its devices account for half the smartphones in Nigeria. In Indonesia, on the other hand, the company retained market share to some extent, particularly through BNO-BM users. Despite healthy sales in emerging countries, which effectively held the company afloat, in 2013 BlackBerry was desperately trying to find a solution for its problems, reducing its workforce by 40% and going as far as putting itself on the market and trying to find an acquirer, attracting interest from the likes of Lenovo and its large shareholder Fairfax Financial, the Canadian Berkshire Hathaway, in a move that was ultimately unsuccessful. The hardware part of the businesses, however, was consistently loss-making, reflecting the changes in consumer preferences and the very thin margin on the sector, particularly when compared with software. Not only, but the total contribution of hardware sales on revenues was steadily declining, from 80% in 2011 to less than 45% in 2015. What was the company to do? It had survived so far in the absence of a clear and simple strategy purely because of a historical fluke. A clear strategic refocus was absolutely necessary, as, effectively, by failing to find a buyer, the company was as good as dead. Cylance acquisition, a strategic change. Cylance has been the largest acquisition by BlackBerry to date. BB acquired the company for $1.4 billion. Utilizing its cash resources. It was not the first acquisition in the sector, but a useful one. BlackBerry had extensive expertise in secure communications and tended to work with large enterprise clients. Cylance, on the other hand, provides threat preventative software to SMEs, complementing the existing offering. It is clear from the latest earnings releases that the company will be heavily reliant on the recently acquired company for growth. ESS, Enterprise Software and Services, has been underperforming for 3 consecutive quarters, while growth at Cylance was up 31% in Q1 and 24% in Q2. After what happened to BlackBerry over the years, now seems like a better time for recovery than it has been in many years. There are certainly a lot of strengths in the strategy pursued by BlackBerry, such as understanding the client base that it is best positioned to serve, as well as where those strengths could play in the future, such as the IoT and eOut space. The sheer size of BlackBerry, however, certainly makes it even tougher to execute a reinvention of this magnitude successfully. We will be watching alongside market participants. Is BlackBerry still making cell phones? John Chen announced that the company would cease to make mobile phones in 2016. Instead, the company would design phones and then license their production to local companies in the markets where it still had some traction, India, with Optimus, TCL, in the US, and globally, and Meraputih for Indonesia. What caused BlackBerry's failure? BlackBerry lost out to Apple and Samsung for dominance of the smartphone market. Fundamentally, the company's mistakes were linked to an excessive focus on enterprise over consumer tastes and preferences, an OS that nobody was building apps for.